Welcome everybody back to Veil of Sound. It's Saturday, it's Sunday, interview Sunday as usual here. And we have a great guest, somebody whose voice spreads intimacy as much as I seldomly heard over the last couple of years. Erik Moggridge, the man behind Aerial Ruin. Erik, thanks for being on our show.
Hi, Thorsten. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I was really happy that you so quickly agreed to do this because we have to say you got a new record out at the beginning of March, if I remember correctly. Loss-Seeking Flame. First of all, a very interesting title, a very interesting record. And we have also, at one point, we have to talk about one certain song on that record. But first of all, where are we catching you right now? What are you doing?
This is home. Yeah, this is my apartment. And yeah, I'm just, it's my morning. I'm got some tour stuff coming up with the Stygian Bough, the Bellwitch project. So I've just been texting with those guys about all that kind of stuff, and just a lot of, musician-y chores, I suppose. So yeah. Yeah, so it's evening time, morning for me.
yeah, it's 9-hour difference. That's true. So how were the first reactions to Loss-Seeking Flame? How has the record been appreciated? Let's put it like that.
It's been very well received. I've nothing but really positive things. I think a lot of people sort of feel it's the best Aerial Ruin record, and I certainly think it is.
I would say so.
And yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. And it's definitely, just like through online orders and stuff, have been a lot more like in the first 2 weeks than any other album. I'm doing it totally DIY. So, there's no real distribution as of yet, although I'm going to be getting some distribution in Europe. Yeah, so it's great. We did the record release show the other night and played the album in its entirety. And my friend Andrea played violin on the last song, Ideation, as she does on the record. And and her band Exolensis played and opened the show, and they were great. And Drouth, these other friends of ours, played the show, and they were great. So yeah, then a bunch of people bought it at the show. So yeah, very happy with how it's being received.
When I'm just thinking about that release show that you have been mentioning, it's very interesting that the most intimate, the most reduced, and also the most silent act, in a way, was you. How did people receive that order? That order of first Excellences and then you.
Well, I mean, I mostly play with metal bands, so that's nothing new. And I pretty much put together the show myself, so it was. I think it's good. Like, I mean, a lot of times if I'll do shows with metal bands, sometimes it makes sense for the quiet guy to go first. But since it was the record release, I thought maybe it'd be a little more appropriate to have me sort of be in the middle, but not at the very end, because it's weird to play after two really loud blast beaty bands,
Yeah, that's true.
But it was a great crowd, and everybody was there to see the whole show. It was and it was one of the first shows that was really well attended, I think, that I'd been at since pandemic restrictions started to loosen and stuff. So, I mean, things have been going on in town for a while, but yeah, it felt like a reuniting with a lot of people I hadn't seen in a while. So it was great.
I can imagine so. Just for everybody who might not know you that well, Aerial Ruin is your very intimate acoustic. Can we say folk, or is it? Well, let's just call it folk for a moment. It's your very intimate guitar-based folk project. But you have been making music in the metal scene for a long while. I know that you've been in other bands as well. How did that change come to life from other bands now to Aerial Ruin for a few years already?
Yeah, very slowly, really. So, I mean, my very first band was Epidemic, that started as teenagers, and sort of a thrash death metal band. We did
only 2 years ago, and it was Corona.
Right. No, we actually had a demo compilation come out as a reissue called Pandemic about 10 years ago. Oof. But yeah, so that we did a couple of in the early mid 90s, we did a couple of Metal Blade albums, and then I had started a band called Old Grandad, which is still active these days occasionally, and we put out a new album in 2019. And that was sort of like a lot of mixed genres, and we all did vocals, and I sort of introduced some kind of attempts at melodic vocals within that band, but it was like, you know, massively loud backline that I had to sort of sing over. So eventually I kind of went through some, I don't know, somewhat spiritual experiences, I suppose, that with that combining with wanting to do something where I could really hear my voice and do something very introvert as opposed to the extrovert nature of playing loud music, I just slowly started kind of writing the very earliest Aerial Ruin songs on a 4-track and then later an ADAT. And yeah, it was a recording project starting, you know, probably, yeah, in the sort of early 2000s, but didn't start doing any gigs until 2008, I think it was. And then I moved to Portland in 2009, and it slowly became more and more of a live thing. And, you know, in the last 7-8 years, I've done a lot of touring. So yeah, I just, yeah, out of a need to express myself spiritually and on a more personal level, and just the sheer dynamics of having a voice that sounds better at low volumes, it just slowly emerged and became more and more dominant in my creative life.
Do you think that your move to Portland has also led to some success because of the, well, Portland having been one of those epicenters of the new folk movement with Kill Rock Stars and everything around that? Do you think that the location where you live now is a very good one for your kind of music?
I think it's a good one for music in general. But as far as like, you know, Kill Rock Stars or any of that sort of more indie stuff, that doesn't really have anything to do with any connections that I've made, you know. Like I've always been a very DIY guy, and and I think about all the people that I've met and I've done stuff with up here, and how that would have been very different if I'd stayed in San Francisco. So, you know, there's a great community up here, and I'm, you know, like I wouldn't have done any stuff with Bellwitch if I'd stayed, you know, down in the Bay Area, for example. But yeah, as far as just that history of like, you know, like people putting out the Elliott Smith records and all that kind of stuff, that's not really anything to do with the scene that I've been involved with. But I am thankful for the scene up here in the Northwest. And, you know, there's Seattle and there's Portland, and then there's so many little towns all scattered around, and it's all, you know, got a great music scene going on. I've been lucky enough to meet so many talented people and people who really care about the music scene here.
And that's also something that I recognize over the years more and more, that this especially Oregon music scene is very, very interesting. And I spoke to ALM from Meesmore a few weeks ago, and he gave a very interesting notion on why the music from that area has such a certain earthiness and gloominess. And he said, like, well, you have to think about our region up here being a region with more or less 4 to 5 months of really good weather, and the rest of the year is basically gloom. It's dark and it's rainy and everything. And do you think that that also makes for a very good ground for your kind of music, and also metal music in general? You know, the weather in itself?
I think so, and I think that, you know, Agaloc's The Mantle certainly represents that in a way that a lot of people are familiar with. Like that album is really like a sort of a tribute to Portland and the surrounding areas and the Columbia River Gorge, and yeah, and there's something. I mean, I found San Francisco was a very like harshly intense living experience, and you know, I had a much sort of more excessive lifestyle back then when I lived there when I was younger. And there's something about moving up here to the serenity of this rainforest of a region, that it may be gloomy and it may be overcast and cloudy, but it's also very lush and beautiful and very soothing. So I think that, yeah, I think it relaxed me as a general person. And I think that is sort of reflected in the music. Like if you listen to the very first Aerial Ruin album, Valleys of the Earth, I mean, there's just a harshness there that you can tell because a lot of it was recorded in San Francisco while drinking cheap vodka and stuff. You know? But I think that the subsequent albums I've done since living up here are just have a much more, I don't know, relaxed feel. It's a subtle difference because it's the same inspiration from the music, but yeah. So there's a gloom, but there's also a beauty and a soothingness.
Very interesting. And there's also something that I would totally agree with. Having listened through your discography over the last few days, I have a feeling, it might just be my impression, but I have a feeling as if you've grown more accustomed with your own voice, with how to use it. And I think the production sets your voice into a very, very good light. Not that it needs to, because your voice is a really good one, but I think the production of the records has become, yeah, I would say lusher and lusher when it comes to your voice itself.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like I listen back to Valleys of the Earth now, and I really love all the songs on that. But like I cringe at some of the vocal performances. Not that they're bad. It's just that, like, yeah, like you said, I just wasn't as good as using my voice back then. I've just gotten more and more comfortable with it. And then the production, for sure, like all the recent albums I've done have been recorded by Lot 3 Audio, who is a friend of mine who often records like chamber music and classical music, and used to be head of sound at Marlene Schnitzer Hall, where the Organ Symphony performs here. And we record all my albums in his house, and we do it slowly over a very long time period, and we just take our damn time and just make it as perfect as we can. And I have lots of production ideas myself, and he, you know, he'll throw some in there too. And he's very into listening to the experiments that I want to do. And especially on the new album, I mean, I just really got into getting seriously into, you know, the vocal stereo, like layering stuff, and just getting perfect reverb levels, and just slightly tweaking mixes to just make it more of an epic sort of a soundscape. You know, I've always liked to do that kind of stuff, but I think it was just really taken to a new level on the new album. So every time I record with Lot 3 Audio, it just gets even more dialed in, and we're already halfway done with the next album. So yeah,
good
that's been
to hear.
A rewarding relationship for sure.
First of all, I wanted to ask something else, but after you just said that, I hope you don't mind me comparing your voice as a one-man Simon and Garfunkel in some parts.
No, not at all. You're not the first person that said that.
But is that like an influence on you? Because there are really moments in the first few tracks, interestingly, not on Ideation, but on the other 3 tracks, where I think like, isn't it Paul? Isn't it Art? Who is it? Is that an inspiration for you?
Not really. I mean, I really like what I've heard of the more famous Simon and Garfunkel songs. Like The Sound of Silence is such a beautiful track. But I think I have maybe one of their old albums somewhere, and I'm not really that familiar with the catalog, really. I think that
me neither. It's just like the sound of a voice.
Yeah, I think the inspiration for harmonizing came more from, like Pink Floyd and Syd Barrett and Alice in Chains. You know, that's sort of where I kind of was, heard some of the layering that those bands would do. And
which is very interesting when you say it. It really makes sense, definitely, because I mean, like Simon Garfunkel might be the first one, but that layering of your voice, or also positioning within the mix, is very, very interesting. Because sometimes I had a feeling as if there are like 3, 4, 5 Eriks singing at the same time, even though I noticed that it's just more or less the position in the mix. Or did you also really record yourself 3, 4 times and layered them upon each other?
Sometimes it was way more than that. That's the great thing about Dave from Lot 3 Audio. It's just he's so patient with just going fucking epic, like every album I want to have some songs that are just recorded with me singing and playing and not having any overdubs, like a simple folk dynamic.
Yeah.
But then I like the other extreme, and the other extreme over the years has just grown more and more. And it's like on this album, I mean, I think some of the more lush parts at the end of Ideation, there's like 25, 30 vocal tracks, you know.
So but there's 25, 30 Eriks.
Yeah. Like I just kept overdubbing and overdubbing and overdubbing, even though like a lot of times I'm just singing the same melody and then there's a counter melody, you know, like the counter melody will maybe only have 5 tracks, but then actually, you know, we probably recorded that many, but not that many made it into the mix. But there's just a lot. But then like on the Flames Intent, the third song, there's a lot of that positioning stuff. It's like there's a lot of voices in the like mixed low, just drenched in reverb. And then there's more primary voices, which are maybe just like, you know, 4 or 5 doing 2 different vocal melodies. And they are, you know, with just a sort of normal reverb level. So yeah, that was a really fun song to do. I think the very end of that song is one of my favorite parts of the record.
When you perform live, I mean, like you cannot have 20 or 30 versions of yourself on stage. Do you then reduce it to 1, or do you also use like recordings in the background? Do you sing to your own choir?
I don't believe in using backing tracks, and my live show used to just be the simple thing of me singing and playing. So then if I was doing a song that had a lot of overdubs on it, it would just have to be a minimalistic version of it. But then in more recent years, I've gotten into using loop pedals. So yeah, so I will loop the guitar riff, and then I will start layering the vocals on top of that with a separate vocal looper. And it's all live and done on stage. I don't believe in using backing tracks. But so in, you know, the whole midsection of Where Sky Lays Buried, when it has the really big vocal part, yeah, like I can do a sort of version of that is somewhat like the album, where it like really builds up. And by the end of it, there is like 10 Eriks going. But it's all Eriks that have happened on stage. None of them are pre-recorded. And then same thing with the end of the Flames Intent. I'm able to do a sort of a version of that. It's not, I mean, neither one of them is quite as detailed as the album version, because, you know, you just can't do that even with a loop pedal. But so a lot of songs I'm able to do something like that. And that I think makes the show a lot more interesting. And then I can also like play guitar solos above the guitar that I loop live on stage. So I have that dynamic of really big and really stripped down in the live show now, which I didn't in the early years. So yeah, that has been really cool. And I think it really draws people in. And then they like start looking at my feet to see what I'm doing. I think people realize that like it's not a pre-recorded backing track. It's a very different feel that you know, it's still a live performance in every sense of the word.
Yeah, I can imagine, because I also saw an artist already do that. I don't know if you know Final Fantasy, Owen Pallet from Montreal.
Obviously
lots of
no, but I'll check that out. Lots of bands that use loop pedals on stage. It's not obviously the first.
and that of course makes sense, because then you can create that grandezza that a lot of your songs have. I mean, like, and that is also something that I found very interesting, even though your songs are very, very intimate and very fragile up to some point. There is always that moment, or there is often a moment of like pure grandezza breaking out, something big happening, as you said, like huge choirs in the background of yourself and all that. Is that, I mean, it's not contradictory, you know, that's not, but is that dichotomy, is that something that you are aiming for?
Yeah, it definitely is. Like I just like that sort of flow between the really stripped down and intimate, and then the just making something really huge. And, you know, like it's a, like I think you mentioned like acoustic guitar based project, and which it is obviously, but I think my voice is really the primary instrument of Area One. It's what gives its flavor, and it's, you know, all the songwriting is around the vocals, you know, it's whereas some, you know, some bands vocals are much more minimalistic or more of an afterthought. So
definitely true.
Yeah.
Then the question must be, what comes first for your music? The lyrics and the vocals, the lyrics, or the melody, so to speak?
The melody.
Okay.
So yeah, I usually kind of write melodies in conjunction with guitar parts, and then like a song might just flesh itself out. And then later on, I'll sort of finish the lyrics. Like the lyrics kind of come to me as the melody progresses, but then it'll be later on that I sort of flesh out what the words really are.
So then when you are laying down the first ideas on track, then that's just vocalizing.
Well, guitar and vocals. So I usually
that's clear, but you don't have like special lyrics already written down, so then your voice is vocalizing.
Yeah, it's just the vocal melody. So I when I come up with a vocal melody, I'll sort of sing improvised lyrics or mush mouth lyrics, and then I'll record like early demo versions that just have those sort of temporary lyrics, and then but then sometimes certain phrases will start to sort of show themselves within that process, and a direction will happen before I sort of sit down and try to finish the lyrics, like on pad and paper type of thing.
Very interesting. What also interests me is the idea. I mean, like, of course, a project like yours, Aerial Ruin, is like a very, very it's like a one-man project, and therefore it's always a little DIY. But this time you've gone total DIY. Why?
Well, I think I wanted to get this album out within a certain time frame, and I thought if I was going to do it on a label, I wouldn't be able to control that. That was essentially why I did that. I have had labels do some releases in the past, or certain formats of certain releases, and with Bind Rune doing the split with Panopticon, obviously. And, but yeah, it was essentially a scheduling thing. I just wanted to be able to control when the album came out. So I could, I was thinking that maybe the pandemic would be really have subsided by now, and I could be on the beginning of a huge tour, and I would want to have all the copies to sell. And spring is a great time to tour. So it didn't really quite work out that way, and it looks like I'm just going to be touring with Stygian Bough instead. But yeah. Anyway, yeah. Desire for timing, but yeah, who knows? Maybe the next album will just be on a label, and I'll have less packages to sit around and tape up all day.
You've spoken about control, or you mentioned it twice. Is that something that is important to you?
Yeah,
control of your project.
It is, and I've gotten really used to that, and I've gotten used to what to expect from a DIY experience, and I know what I can cut. I have some idea of what I can sell and what I can make happen at shows and all that kind of thing. Whereas doing all formats with a label, that would be a totally new experience. Like I wouldn't really know what to expect. And I've had an offer or two that I've turned down because I just, it seemed like I was giving away too much and not really understanding what I would get in return. Yeah. So, force of habit and liking to control things, I suppose.
Totally okay. As I said, your project and your voice has a very intimate function, at least on me, and I'm very sure it also has that on other people. There is something very, very warm in the way that you perform and in the way that you use your voice. And you've already spoken about loop pedals. And is there anything else that you use on stage to create a certain level of intimacy? I mean, like, I guess that you're not standing around in the middle of a sea of candles, but
I would like to have a sea of candles. I think getting around to having a really a theatrical visual element is just something I haven't felt like I've had time to do.
You would like?
Yeah, I think a sea of candles would be great, but I'll probably, it's not the type of thing I would want to sort of drive around the country with, or, deal with in Europe when sometimes I'm on the bus or the train or what have you. So yeah, no, it's really just kind of about the music, and there's nothing special. There's just the two loop pedals, and I have a my own reverb for the vocals on stage, and so I can have delay on certain songs. So I have presets for that. And yeah, it's a very simple show, just slightly less simple than it used to be with the loop pedals involved. I mean, it's really great when you can play the occasional show in some magical place, like like sort of a chapel, or like the Roadburn set was in this very beautiful place, or like Cascadian Yule is always like that's a festival we have out here in the Northwest. It's always
didn't you play when you played Roadburn last time? Didn't you play in Het Patronaat in the old church?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a beautiful place, that unfortunately is not a venue anymore.
Oh, that's too bad.
Thanks to capitalism.
Yeah. I played some great nature spots like on European tours too. So like, I sometimes I'll just play shows where other people have made a really nice visual environment, but it's not something I've had the time or inspiration to deal with yet.
So when we talk about the new album, we've already talked about a few songs, but of course we have to talk about Ideation. 21-minute folk epic. I mean, there are prog metal bands whose 3 or 4-parted prog suits are shorter than Ideation. What came to your mind when you did that? 21 minutes.
Yeah, no, it was so fun. So I started demoing that during the early months of the pandemic, and Andrea Morgan, who plays the violin on it,
who does a wonderful job,
a friend of mine. Yeah. And then so I think I came up with about the first 7 minutes, like the sort of first verse, and there's the first sort of guitar movement, and I had that just as a standalone song, and then I asked her to play on that, and we were just sending demos back and forth very slowly, and then I sort of came up with a sort of more freak out section in the middle, and then I sent that to her, and then she did stuff there, and then I came up with a whole part, like the whole second half of like the second sort of 10.5 minutes, which is all sort of based around one simple guitar part. I came up with that, and then that just kept growing and growing and growing. I thought it was going to end where the vocals end at about 18-minute mark, but then it seemed like it would be cool to have it just keep going and do a guitar solo, and then have Andrea come back in with all the lovely guitar stuff. So we demoed that. Like I had a demo on my computer, and I just kept adding to the same demo, and it slowly just grew to that length over the course of quite a few months. And then we went into Lot 3 audio, later that year, early 2021, and just re-recorded the whole thing. But it was really already completely hashed out at that exact length of 21.5 minutes. And I'm glad it's not 1 second shorter, because I think it's all it all needs to be there, really. But I never set out to write a 21.5-minute song. It just grew that way naturally.
Well, I totally get what you mean. I mean, like there is no chunk on that song that needs to be cut. That is definitely true.
And I think with Andrea's accompaniments, I think that's also what made it as long as it was, because that added an outside element that was really interesting. I think if I did that song without her, maybe it would be, a lot shorter, and maybe I would have some electric on there or something. But her stuff was so great, and she wrote all of her own parts, and it made the need for it to be that long necessary, because we needed to make sure that she had the space to say what she needed to say within the piece.
I mean, you could even publish that on a 7-inch, and you would have to turn the sides. It's a really, really, really great song. It definitely is. But one thing that came to my mind, I thought, like, is he trying to show Bellwitch that he could also write songs that complete LP?
I do think that may have, I think there may be some influence there.
I mean, imagine.
Writing with those guys.
I mean, imagine you do a show not as Stygian Bough, but as Ariel Ruin and Bellwitch. You perform 2 songs, and it's basically 2 hours. And I would be there. I would. I love Mirror Reaper, and I love Ideation, but I was like, 21 minutes. Okay. Edge of sanity. But it's a really cool song. Would you also play that live without Andrea, or would you say, no, if I play it live without her, it needs to be cut?
No, I think I'll only do it when she's available. But thankfully, we did our first performance of it. I think so. I want to just basically, when she's around, I want to just try to perform the album in its entirety. And when she's not around, then I'll and I'm doing a normal Aerial Ruin show, I'll play just the first 3 songs and then older material as the second half of the set. I mean, so there's a song called Altar on my album, Ashy or Cares, that Don Anderson from Agalloch plays really great guitar accompaniments on. So that's another example of a very talented guest collaborator. So I never did that live, when I was touring in support of that album. But years later, I kind of rewrote the whole thing. And with his blessing, I just went out and I did a solo version where I had a bunch of different vocal parts that I was using the vocal loopers for, and a bunch of, kind of guitar stuff on myself. And I did a totally different version of it. And that became part of my set. And then we actually did a show together in Antwerp and performed it together for the first time in late 2019. So we got to kind of combine the 2 versions for that. But I think with Ideation, I don't think I would do it without Andrea. I think the parts are too sort of intertwined, and kind of it's
her parts are essential.
Possible. I could rewrite it technically, but I just don't think that's not where the inspiration for the piece lies.
No, I also think that her parts are too important. Yeah, her parts are definitely too important to do that.
Yeah. By the way, I also have on the new album that I'm halfway through recording now, side 2 is also a 21.5-minute song.
Well, you should do those 2 at a gig. Not much to look.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. I love when people go a little bit berserk on their records.
Yeah, I had no idea how long it was until I just sort of finished the demo, and I'm like, oh wow, this is almost exactly the same length as Ideation.
Very interesting. I have to ask that because there is a certain paradox between your choice of collaborations, or at least splits, and Stygian Bough, because that is metal. We don't have to talk about that. And the music that you make, which is more folksy. Which genre do you associate yourself with?
I think I associate myself more with metal. I mean, I know that Aerial Ruin is not really metal. It's only sort of metal in a sort of residual way, or metal adjacent. But I've just always listened to metal, and I've spent so much time playing metal, and I still do. So I think I associate myself with that term more. And folk music is, I don't mind it that people call me folk music, and I think it's sort of helpful because has so much in common with folk music, but that sort of implies that it's influenced by traditional folk music, and folk music is influenced by acoustic music going way back into the centuries. And my music's not. It's very much influenced by my own sort of spiritual, subpersonal experiences. So it's not drawing on that tradition at all. I mean, everything draws on tradition in some sort of indirect fashion, because we are all influenced by tradition in some way. But there's a difference there. So yeah, so it's great that everyone calls me all these different genre titles. I'm all for it, but it's not how I think about it.
Mm-hmm. You've already mentioned that there is some introversy or introvert nature to Aerial Ruin. So is that project also for you some kind of catharsis? Or is it more not catharsis in a way that you have to cope, or is it just using all the elements that you encounter in life?
Yeah, I think it is catharsis. I mean, I think music is all very sort of healing, and it's also very spiritual for me. It's it's an exploration of my spiritual side, and an exploration of a lot of sort of ego death experiences I had that sort of started the inspiration for the project, and kind of starting there and letting it just wander by itself. So yeah, I think it's all of those things.
You've already mentioned Stygian Bough quite often, and for those people who don't know, it's Erik's, I would say now, like, second band, right? Because it seems as if it's not the one-time collaboration that it seemed to be at first. Now it's Stygian Bough is a real band, and you're touring and everything, and it's your project with the guys from Bellwitch.
Yeah.
And you know, where are you now? I mean, like, the first album was amazing, definitely. I'm already looking forward to the next one. And now my question is, where are you guys at concerning the second Stygian Bough album?
We have a lot of stuff demoed. Like I demoed a 20-minute piece actually about a year and a half ago, but I sent to them and they all really like that. And then we have leftover riffs from the first album, and then Dylan has some ideas that I've done overdubs on it. So as we get ready to do these tours, the first one's coming up here in just in 3 weeks actually. We'll also start to work on the material together, and they've done a Bellwitch album without me, which they're just calling Bellwitch. Essentially, the projects have kind of split into two halves now. So it's like they will use the Bellwitch name when it's just the two of them, and then we will say Stygian Bough, a Bellwitch Aerial Ruin collaboration for everyone that's the three of us. And now that they're done with that, we're going to go into full creative mode for the second album. So my guess is that maybe we'll record at the end of this year, but we have to just sort of see, you know, how long it takes for the material to develop. But yeah, so it'll be an ongoing thing. That's what we hope for anyway. And yeah, they will continue to do Bellwitch stuff without me, and I'll continue to do Aerial Ruin stuff without them as well.
How did that collaboration come to happen? Did you
well, as you may know, I've been a guest collaborator with Bellwitch going back to the very first album. On every record, I would write and perform a vocal part on one of the songs, and then by the time we got to Mirror Reaper, I had a bigger input. Like I was, you know, sort of on the, you know, almost half of the record. I was like the sort of primary vocalist, and the second half, or the second sort of third of it, or third of it, I should say. And so it just sort of like every time we would collaborate, it just sort of seemed like my role would grow. And then Dylan just kind of came up with the idea of like, well, why don't we just do a full collaboration record? And yeah, and it just sort of just seemed the natural evolution of it. Yeah, it's really cool to be able to do that and actually play guitar as well as just being a vocalist. I'm really looking forward to it.
I mean, like, it's a really interesting collaboration that always strikes me, you know, like two acts that at first glance are very different, collaborating on such a unique level that it makes total sense, and it's like a very, very symbiotic thing, at least to me. However, you also did a few splits as Aerial Ruin with other people, like Panopticon. How does it feel for you as a metal fan, but like this folk project, to do those splits?
No, it's great. You know, like I was really thrilled that Austin wanted to do that. I think it was his idea when he first suggested it. And I mean, that's just a split. We're not playing on each other's half of the record, so it's, you know, just two separate recordings. But then I ended up doing the guest vocal on The Embers of Dawn, a song on And Again Into the Light album.
Yeah, the last one.
And so then we got to collaborate musically, which was great too. Yeah, you know, it's just Austin is just such a great guy, and he's such a talented and unique one-man project. And yeah, an honor to do a record with him. And, and you know, back in 2013, I did also a split with Stevie Floyd from Dark Castle. And on that one, we did do a little collaborating. It's like two separate solo recordings, but we would do a little bit of guest vocals, and I think it sounds on each side. So that was also really fun.
Cool. I have a question. I mean, like you said that you don't consider yourself a folk artist, but what are your musical influences then?
I think as far as Aerial Ruin goes, I felt like I never had that many musical influences. Like certainly Pink Floyd, and even more the Syd Barrett solo albums. Like the sort of the kind of unhinged minimalism of the Syd Barrett solo albums, to me, just had a profound impact on me. Like I think he is really my biggest influence. And then later on, I discovered the Mark Lanegan solo albums, like, you know, The Winding Sheet and Whiskey for the Holy Ghost and Field Songs. Those three records specifically, that was another exposure to sort of dark minimalistic music that had a real different kind of a heaviness. It wasn't metal. It was very, it was a really interesting illustration that, you know, someone could do something so quiet that sounded so heavy and so emotional. So yeah, I think that, you know, those are really the two primary ones. I think, like I said, like from a dynamic standpoint of like vocal layering, like I said, Alice in Chains was sort of influence. And I, you know, and I love the vibe of a lot of the Radiohead albums. But I don't quite say, I wouldn't necessarily think of it as that much of an influence. The influences are more kind of experiences that I've had in my life and spiritual stuff as well.
So at the end of every interview, we always have like a quick fire questions round, and I have prepared a few quick fires for you. You just choose one of the two alternatives and maybe give a short explanation.
Okay.
As you've spoken so much about Pink Floyd, I have to ask you, Dark Side of the Moon or Wish You Were Here?
Wish You Were Here, but I love them both.
As you don't have a problem with being considered a folk project, I also have to ask, Blonde on Blonde or Highway 61 Revisited?
I don't think I've heard those.
Dylan, wow.
Yeah. Oh, so those Dylan songs.
Yeah, those are both Dylan albums. It's cool. It's cool to hear somebody who's not having a problem with folk just simply saying, "Okay, I've never listened to either of them." That is a very honest
I'm not that familiar with Dylan really. I mean, I like Bob Dylan, but I haven't spent much time with him.
Yeah, I think the problem is also like if you dive deep into his discography, it will take you 4 months to get out again. I know you like literature, as you also quoted Khalil Gibran on your new record. But maybe going a little bit older again, Moby Dick or Of Mice and Men?
I've never read Moby Dick. I loved Of Mice and Men when I was a kid. My brother recommended Moby Dick, and I've been meaning to read it, so maybe I need to do that soon. Heart
of Darkness or On the Road?
Oh, that's a tough one. They are both absolute favorites of mine. Well, I just read Heart of Darkness for the first time 3 or 4 years ago, and I was so blown away by how beautiful it was. But On the Road is one of my favorite ever books. I reread that for the second time a couple of years ago, and it's just so brilliant. Yeah, I can't decide. Was that?
No, you first. You wanted to finish your idea.
Oh, they're just two such brilliant masterpieces. I can't pick one. They're too good.
Yeah, and it's both are also examples. I mean, like Conrad was an ambiguous character in his own days, but Kerouac, I mean, like at points he was so drunk where he denied himself. And it's like crazy.
Yeah.
I know you live in Portland, so I don't give you the choice Portland versus something else, but Salem or Olympia?
Olympia. You know, I have some friends in Salem who are really amazing and they're fun to be had there, but Olympia as an overall town I think is more interesting and more beautiful and close to the Olympics.
Los Angeles or New York City?
New York. Yeah. New York City is much more interesting. A lot of great people doing a lot of great things in LA, but as an actual physical region, I do not like it.
Okay. Edgar Allan Poe or Lovecraft?
You know, I've never read either one of those.
Cool.
get around to that too.
If anybody would ask me, it would always be Edgar Allan Poe. I just love the guy. I've read both intensively, but it will always be Edgar Allan, because he is very quite contrary, and I think you would like Edgar Allan a little bit more, because he cut off as much as possible from every story he wrote. If a name is unimportant, he'll just use an X. If it's even unimportant, if it's an X, then he'll just say the girl or the boy. That would be like, that could be something for you.
Awesome.
For vacations, the sea or the mountains?
The sea. Yeah, it's just something so soothing and majestic about the ocean. But I love the mountains too.
I don't know if you know those two artists, but they have something in common with you. They're both very good at what they do, just like you, and they're both creating folk music in a very, very own way. I'm pretty sure you might know Joanna Newsom, the harpist.
Yes. I've listened to a little bit of her stuff. Very interesting.
I don't know if you know Joseph van Wissum. It's a Belgian lutist. He plays the lute.
No, I haven't. I would love to check that out, though.
But sticking to their instruments, if you had to choose, would it be the lute of Joseph van Wissum or the harp of Joanna Newsom?
If money's not an issue, I think I would go for the harp.
It's a present, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. If money's not an issue, I think the harp is like so different. Like the lute, I understand, is sort of influenced the creation of the guitar. I'm not sure if I'm correct in that. But I think that it's to be able to do something different, a bit more like playing the piano, would be interesting. Which is why I would love to try the harp out. I really look to dive into that.
And then I have one last question: your favorite Panopticon album?
Oh, maybe Autumn Eternal. That's a tough one too. I think that like from Roads to the North, like up to the present day, everything has been just really, really great. Scars Part 1 is also really great. Yeah, I love them all, but I guess if I'm gonna pick one, I'll stick with Autumn Eternal.
Cool, good choice. But as you said, with Panopticon, you basically cannot do anything wrong.
Exactly.
Erik, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for telling us so much about how you write your stuff, how you perform your stuff. For everybody, once again, his last album, which was released at the beginning of March, Lost Seeking Flame. A very, very good album. You can play it to anybody, and I think nobody will really be able to say something against it. Not even my wife could. And she doesn't like most of my music. She loved it up to ideation, and then she said like, it's already 10 minutes, how long does it go? I love it. Ideation is a great track. It doesn't need to be cut anywhere, and if you want to hear how somebody creates a 21-minute folk song, listen to Lost Seeking Flame. Erik, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Thorsten. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.